I just want to let you know that we are waiting for Senator Ben Allen and Assemblymember Bloom. As you know, traffic is not exactly easy at this time of the evening, so that's why we are waiting a little bit more. Thank you for being here. evening. Good evening, Yola. My name is Hernan Molina, and I'm the Governmental Affairs Liaison for the City of West Hollywood. Thank you, Councilmember Horvath. And I want to welcome you to the Community Forum on the Ellis Act, a state law that we would like to take some action, and that's why we are here. I want to thank you for being here. We are going to have a nice conversation, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce our distinguished panelists. I would like to also let you know that Assemblymember Bloom is on his way from LAX, so we wish him a lot of luck because unfortunately his flight was delayed. Something was completely out of his control, and he's doing his best to be here on time, and we will get him to join our panel as soon as he arrives. So first, let me introduce our senator, our very esteemed senator and very good friend of all of us here in the city of West Hollywood, Senator Ben Allen. And for some of you who may not be fully aware where Senator Allen comes from, he obviously represents the 26th District of the California Senate since November 2014. His district includes a large portion of the South Bay, all the way to Marina del Rey and running north to the Hollywood Hills, and of course includes our great city of West Hollywood. Senator Allen is the chair of the Senate's Education Committee, a member of the Elections and Constitutional Amendments Committee, the Natural Resources and Water Committee, and the very important Transportation and Housing Committee, which will be eventually hearing this bill. He's also the chair of the Joint Committee on the Arts prior to being elected to the Senate. Mr. Allen served as board member and former board president for the Santa Monica Malibu Unified School District. He has a Bachelor of Art degree from Harvard University, where he graduated magna cum laude in history, a Master of Philosophy degree from the University of Cambridge, and a Juris Doctorate degree from UC Berkeley. He's certainly very well qualified.
You're hired.
It's been all downhill since
if it wasn't
then.
enough, he's also fluent in Spanish. Muchas gracias por estar aquí.
Muchas gracias.
So the other panelist that is joining us tonight, who has been instrumental in working with all of us in the city of West Hollywood for many years, she's an attorney. She is the acting manager of the Legal Services and Legislative Affairs Division. She's my boss. Her name is Allison Regan. She's an attorney, and she is joining us tonight because she also has crafted some of these amendments that are included in this bill. So welcome, Allison. Next to Allison is Larry Gross. Larry has been a fixture of West Hollywood and Los Angeles politics since 1973. I asked him how old he was because I couldn't believe that someone...
Stop that.
But he did not tell me, so there's nothing I can say. Larry is the executive director of the Coalition for Economic Survival, CES, that was instrumental in the creation and incorporation of West Hollywood. Larry is a very good friend of all of us, and when you are not friends with Larry, you get to hear about it in many ways. Larry, thank you very much for being here. Last but not least is one of my colleagues, our colleagues here in the city of West Hollywood. He's the housing and the rent stabilization and housing manager. His name is Peter Noonan. And prior to working in West Hollywood for the last 4 years, Peter worked for the city of Beverly Hills, where he did land use policy. He is a graduate with an urban planning degree. Did I get that right, Peter? Thank you, Peter. And I do not want to omit, because there is someone here that is joining us tonight too, which gets to hear a lot of the things that the council discussed all the way in Sacramento. She has been the city's lobbyist for many, many years. She is a very good friend of all of us as well. Her name is Haleen Meshard, and she's joining us tonight here as well. And before I go any further and I get fired tomorrow, before acknowledging the presence of our esteemed mayor, Lauren Meister, Councilmember Lindsay Horvath, Councilmember John D'Amico, who is the person along the members of the City Council who directed us to work on these amendments and particularly these forums. So Councilmember John D'Amico, if you would like to please come and tell us a little bit about why you decided to do this.
Thank you very much. This is Hernan. Let's have a round of applause for Hernan. I want to be super brief because this is really why we're here, but I think it's worth saying two things. First of all, I send regards from John Heilman and John Duran. They both contacted me today and said that they apologized for not being able to attend, but of course, they were never interested in affordable housing anyway. So, it's a joke, of course. But really, so I think it bears telling this little story about why this is happening. We have here in our city, I think, residents that represent probably every point of view with respect to the Ellis Act and Costa-Hawkins. Landlords who will do everything they can to get tenants out, tenants who are afraid that they're already almost evicted. And there's one particular person who's a resident here, Dan Marin, if you would wave your hand, Dan. So Dan lost his house from an Ellis eviction of 30-some years. Dan is a fixture in our community, and Dan, I watched him go through this entire process, was sadly caught with tied hands at almost every turn to help. Dan landed on his feet, and we're all happy about that. He lives in a terrific place. But I think what Dan did mostly was he asked me in a genuine way, are you doing everything you can to change the Ellis Act and to fix this housing question and fix this problem in our city? And I couldn't answer yes, honestly, because it was clear that we weren't. And one of the things that came up immediately was that we spent $500,000 or more lobbying Metro to get a subway to town. And we've never put those sort of resources into our housing stock, into keeping our housing serviceable for another generation or two. Sure, we send letters to our representatives, we participate when we can, but we'd never sort of made a commitment as a city to do the hard work of lobbying our legislators, organizing people up and down the state to really make a change. And the second thing that I asked myself was, what is exactly the change we want to make? What does represent all of our constituents in all these many questions? And so that's what turned into this forum, that we need to talk to our legislators. I mean, the fact that our senator is here and our assembly member is coming is extraordinary and exquisite. This is what access means. And you didn't even have to make a donation to the Re-elect Trump campaign. I mean, there are, legislators are here because they're genuinely interested in this issue. And we get to do this. We get to explain to them both sides and the middle of this problem. And then they'll do the hard work of hopefully crafting legislation that brings us all closer to our goal of keeping housing serviceable in our city for as long as possible, and keeping interested parties interested in making new housing in our city for as long as possible, and keeping residents safe in their housing for as long as possible. So I just want to thank Dan, and I want to thank our community for showing up. And I encourage each and every one of you with a point of view to take the time and tell us what that point of view is, so that we can then turn to our state representatives and our state senator and say, here's what we need from you, and then hold them accountable as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming, and I'm going to give this back to Hernan.
Thank you very much, Council Member. Before we begin, I would like to go over some basic ground rules. I know that for experience in having moderated forums before and having done television shows as a moderator between Republicans and Democrats, that things can be heated. So we would like to ask you to be respectful. If you disagree with one of the points of view, express your point of view in a respectful manner, and let's have a constructive conversation and discussion. The other thing is I'm going to ask you to turn off your cell phones right now. I know that none of you have any beepers, but just in case you're still in 1991, please turn your beeper as well, so we do not disrupt the speakers. At one point during the evening, I'm going to invite you who have any questions to ask questions. You can ask a question. If you are shy and do not want to come to the mic, you can use one of these yellow papers. If you signed up with the speaker's slip, this is not really a regular meeting of the City Council or a Commission. I still will call you and I'll give you an opportunity to make a comment. Assemblymember Bloom's office was kind enough to also bring us contact cards. I assume that Senator Allen's office is there as well in the back. You can also fill up this. This is important because some of you may want to know what's happening with this bill and may like to get updates, and this is one way to do it. The other way, you can always go to senate.ca.gov or assembly.ca.gov, sign up on the pages of the Assemblymember Bloom or Senator Allen, and sign up for the updates that you will receive via email. So without any, much ado, I'd like to invite and welcome again Senator Allen. Thank you for making the time. I know you have a very busy schedule. If you would like to tell a little bit briefly, what are you working in Sacramento and some of your bills, and then we are going to talk about the bills when Assemblymember Bloom arrives, and we are going to take from there. So,
well, really appreciate it, and thank you so much for everyone for coming out today. It's a great crowd, and there's a lot going on in our national political conversation. Of course, one of the big things that we're working on right now in Sacramento is just trying to figure out our new and exciting relationship with the federal government, which is proven to be exceedingly difficult, challenging, worrying on a lot of levels. So I serve as the chairman on our education committee, for example, right now, and we've got a new Secretary of Education who has very little kind of practical knowledge about public education. It appears, at least from what we've seen so far, and from her performance at her confirmation hearings, but is also pursuing a pro-voucher debate. I thought we'd gotten over that many years ago, but here we are back. I'm also the co-chair of our environmental caucus, and that's another area that we're obviously very concerned about the Trump administration's approach. So this is a kind of an area of enormous concern. One of the areas, of course, is the question of whether the new EPA under Scott Pruitt, the new administrator for the EPA, will continue to grant California waivers to allow California to go out ahead of the rest of the country in terms of our greenhouse gas emission goals, our climate change pollutant goals. And since Richard Nixon, the federal government has granted about 140 separate waivers, Republican, Democratic administrations alike, to allow us to have a more aggressive approach to environmental protections. And for the very first time, that's being called into question in a very fundamental way. Mr. Pruitt said during his confirmation hearings that he kind of raised questions about his commitment. We continue to hear a lot of swirling information in Washington about the waiver question. And the new Trump administration budget has proposed a 25% cut to the EPA, and most of that cut seems to be in the area of supports for cut in supports to the states in their important work trying to enforce and protect a lot of critical environmental projects. So things like the San Francisco Bay and cleanup. There was a lot of federal money going into that. That would presumably be dramatically cut back under the proposed budget from the Trump administration. So The state Senate has come forward with several kind of important measures in the environmental area, SB 49, 50, and 51. 49 is an interesting one. It basically seeks to incorporate all of the federal environmental laws into state law so as to be able to codify them and use them to protect our environment moving forward. I've got a bill that I think is very clever, SB 50, which seeks to, it addresses the issue that's currently swirling in Washington right now about the question of federal public lands. And there are a lot of conversations happening in Washington right now about trying to sell off federal lands and rent out federal lands and allow for the exploitation of federal lands, largely by folks who are in the natural resources exploitation world, whether it be oil extractors or mineral exploitation or mining, those sorts of things, lumber. So the idea of the bill is that we would have to, the federal government would have to give right of first refusal to the California State Lands Commission, and there'd be a whole process associated with this. And if they didn't follow the process, then our county recorders would be prohibited from recording the deed of sale, so as to jam up the financing of the federal land sale. All of these things, we're coming up with all sorts of different ideas to try to jam up the effort of the Trump administration to try to impact a lot of those core things that we care about here in California, so as to at least allow us to fight these things out in court and maybe get to a point where we can delay things enough so that when a new administration hopefully comes in 3 years from now, we can have minimized the damage caused by the current administration. Now, of course, this is something that the Texas Attorney General was able to use to great effect against the Obama administration in several areas, and we're in this very curious place of dusting off a lot of his legal arguments and becoming big states' rights champions, which is an awkward place to be, but here we are. So there's a lot happening in that space. We've been working a lot on disclosure and clean money issues. I'm really proud. I was the chair of the Elections and Constitutional Amendments Committee over the last 2 years. I've now moved over to education, but I was very engaged in clean money issues. I continue to be. I actually, the California Clean Money Campaign ranked every single one of the members of the legislature, all 120 of us, and I literally was the number one, kind of on their ranking in terms of a commitment to clean money, because it's something that I really care a great deal about. We've got a couple bills we're trying to get through this year. One of them, the Disclose Act, which seeks to disclose the top 3 donors to the independent expenditures that are out there pummeling your mailboxes with mail, and really make sure that the real donors, not just some sort of additional shell company, because you have these Orwellian names like Californians for Mom and Apple Pie sending you mail, and of course you deserve to know where that money's coming from. And just so at least you can evaluate the arguments and be able to determine whether that should influence your vote or not. I have a similar companion bill, which is a petition disclose act, which basically seeks to do the same thing for those folks that are sponsoring petitions. When people come up to you at Whole Foods and ask you to sign your name, sign your life away for some new initiative, you ought to be able to know where that money's coming from to help fund that petition gathering campaign. Got a whole bunch of environmental bills I'm really proud of that we're going to try to get through. And I'm saving off the housing stuff because I know we're going to talk about this pretty intensely later. But one of them has to do with trying to deal with the neonicotinoid crisis. We've got a big bee population collapse around our state, and there's a particular pesticide, an insecticide, which has been impacting the bees. It's actually been phased out in the European Union, but we still use it quite a bit here, and we want to at least provide labeling, so that people can know when their plants that they're buying at Osh are treated with this particular pesticide. There's a number of other bills I'm happy to go into, but it sounds like you're not interested. So here we are.
Thank you anyway.
Let's move on.
So we are still waiting for Assemblymember Bloom, and I do want to invite now Alison Regan to give us a brief orientation, particularly for the people who are watching us at home or people who are here in the audience and do not necessarily understand all the intricacies of this Ellis Act, and you know how to do it in a way that people can understand in layman's terms. So thank you.
Yeah, I think so. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. So the first thing I think most of you know, one of the hallmarks of rent control is that you can only be evicted for cause. So that means if you stop paying your rent or if you violated a lease term, those are the only ways that you can be evicted. There are a couple of exceptions to that. For example, if your owner wants to live in one of his or her units, you can be evicted for that reason, and that's without cause. That's a no-fault eviction. The Ellis Act allows a landlord to empty out an entire building without cause, so long as he or she signs a piece of paper that says, I intend to leave the residential rental market. The landlord does not have to prove that there's another use for their property. They don't have to show any type of permits or other entitlements. They just have to sign under penalty of perjury that they really, really are going out of the residential rental business. The reason this was enacted was in response to a court case called Nash versus City of Santa Monica. And Mr. Nash argued to the court he wanted to be able to evict his tenants. He wanted to get out of the residential rental business. The court said, well, look, there's a simple answer to this. Sell your property. If you don't want to be a landlord anymore and you're here in an area zoned for multifamily residential rental use, sell your property. Well, the legislature said, no, that's not fair. The landlord has a right to do whatever he or she wants with his property. And so they enacted this law to allow landlords to leave the residential rental market and evict their tenants without cause to do that. Now, the legislature also recognized that there was a lot of potential for abuse there. Because there's no requirement to show that there's another use for your property or that you intend to do something else with your property, there was a fear that some landlords might do this to evade rent control. So they put some restrictions in place to try to deter landlords from doing that. So, for example, if you evicted all your tenants and then turned right around and re-rented your units at market rates, then there are penalties for that. The city or the former tenants can sue for punitive damages if you do that within a couple of years. And there are penalties that they decrease over time. So if you've waited 10 years or more to put your property back on the rental market, then there are fewer penalties than if you do it immediately. The thinking was it's more clear if you're turning right around and re-renting your property, it's more clear that you're doing it to get out of rent control as opposed to waiting a longer period of time. Unfortunately, what we're seeing now is that those penalties that were put in place are no longer an effective deterrent to unscrupulous landlords who want to evade rent control. And that is because market rates have skyrocketed so high, and our rent control rents there's such a large gap between the rent control rents and the market rate rents that an unscrupulous landlord, and I want to stress that most landlords are law-abiding citizens. They want to obey the law. They want to do the right thing. So it's unfair to them to give an incentive to an unscrupulous landlord to take advantage of the law and to make it cost-effective for them to do so. Because right now, if you're a landlord who doesn't have any qualms about breaking the law, you do that cost-benefit analysis, you're going to come out ahead if you kick out all your tenants and then you re-rent your property at market rates. So I think one of and here's Assemblymember Bloom. Do you want to? No, good to see you.
Perfect timing.
Yes. This is one of the problems that Assemblymember Bloom's bill is hoping to address, is to strengthen some of those penalties to make it a more effective deterrent for landlords to try to evade the law. And I'm just looking at my notes to make sure.
Alison, if I can ask you a question. The Ellis Act does not apply to every jurisdiction because it only applies to rent-stabilized jurisdictions?
Well, that's correct. So only rent-stabilized jurisdiction require a for-cause eviction, and so obviously if you are not in a rent-control jurisdiction, you don't need this excuse to evict your tenants. All you have to do is give a 30-day notice.
Great. So as you can see, our esteemed assembly member and friend, he's turning around because he's very modest. I know him.
He's more comedic than modest, I think.
Assemblymember Richard Bloom is in the house, so I think we need to give him a good
Hello, everybody.
applause. He managed to make it from LAX at rush hour in less than an hour.
And I really apologize for being late. My
No,
plane was
absolutely.
obviously Senator Allen didn't work as hard today, and was able to get on an earlier
Oh,
flight.
I thought that only happened in the West Hollywood City Council. those comments.
We
Anyway,
were actually worried that the apartment association might have gotten you and were holding you hostage. So we were
well, they probably filled up the road with a lot of cars, so you wouldn't arrive.
Not yet.
But since I was able to introduce properly Senator Allen, I would like to take this time to also introduce properly our Assembly member, who has been elected to serve the 50th district, which includes West Hollywood, Beverly Hills, Santa Monica, and parts of Los Angeles in the west side, in 2012. Before serving in the Assembly, and I can say it by heart without reading it, he was mayor and council member in the city of Santa Monica for many years.
That other city down.
That city, that little progressive city in the west side. He was also member of the West Side City's Council of Government, and now he's on the budget subcommittee for transportation, which is also a very important budget that deals with transportation needs. And I don't know if you heard, we are really trying very hard to have an alignment of the proposed metro line through West Hollywood. And Assemblymember Richard Bloom has been very helpful, as well as Senator Allen. I didn't know this, but in researching a little bit more about you, you are a local, attended Fairfax High, although you are born in Philadelphia, correct? So Phil is in the house
Right
as
on
well.
so far.
And he's also a lawyer and who has practiced family law for many years. So thank you for making it tonight. I know it's hard coming from Sacramento, and this traffic is obviously a problem for all of us.
You're welcome. It's good to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Senator Allen had an opportunity also to tell us a little bit about what he's doing in Sacramento, and I would like for you to do as well. And then we'll talk about your Assembly Bill 982. Allison just gave a little bit of a brief orientation to what the Ellis Act is, but if you would like to share with us a little bit about what's happening in Sacramento and what you are working.
Great. Well, we're working on a lot of legislation this year. The Speaker of the Assembly made what I think is a big mistake, and is allowing us to carry 25 bills instead of the normal 20 bills, which adds up to 50 over a 2-year term. And somehow I got myself to 33 bills. So there's a problem there. But they cover a wide variety of subjects, and the major area of focus for me this year is housing. I don't know if, may I call you Ben here? Yeah, okay. It just seems so formal if I'm saying Senator Allen. So I don't know if Ben said this, but there are 130 housing bills between the Senate and the Assembly this year. As we always do, we outperform the Senate. There's 100 in the Assembly, and I'll stop, and 30 in the Assembly, in the Senate. And
an inferiority complex.
Right, no question about that. I'm carrying 11 of those bills. One of them relates to an ADU, auxiliary dwelling unit reform bill that I carried last year successfully, and the governor signed, and that needs some tweaking this year. But the other town I'd like to tell you a little bit about. But I think most of you probably know that going back to my time on the Santa Monica City Council, affordable housing and homelessness have been 2 areas of focus for me. So this is really just a continuation, in my view, of the work that I've done all along. And I think the fact that there's 130 bills on housing reflects a couple of things. One is that people, legislators, and I think the public in general, are really focused finally on this issue throughout California, not just here in LA, but really throughout the state. And I think that portends good things for addressing the issue. But the fact that there's 130 bills also speaks to the fact that there's not one real silver bullet that's going to solve all of our problems. It's going to be a range of solutions that we're going to have to enact. And there was even a report from the Legislative Analyst's Office only yesterday that said that we can do all the legislating we want in Sacramento. People are really going to need to adjust their expectations about the amount of housing that we accommodate in the state of California, because we have a shortfall in the number of units that are necessary throughout the state. And we also need to be thinking about where all those units are going to be located. You know, our environmental goals are related to our housing goals. So let me tell you a little bit, in addition to the Ellis Act bill that we'll be talking about in this program, about the other bills that I'm carrying. Do I have a couple of minutes to do that or not?
I'll let you know if you are going to. You know me already.
I do. We first got to know one another at the West Side Cities COG, I think. Yes. So it's been quite a few years now.
And you know that I'm not usually very quiet.
You know, I wasn't going to say anything. One of the bills that I have is to adopt a bill that's similar to something that New York did way back in 1982, that would provide an amnesty for landlords who own warehouse space that is not up to code. And this is really an idea that comes out of the ghost ship tragedy in Oakland. But it would allow landlords who have substandard space to have an amnesty period to bring those facilities up to code and still retain them as housing. We would, the language hasn't been fixed yet, but the idea is to allow landlords to do this without fear of receiving large fines, so that we can get those units safe and keep the housing. And I think one of the recurrent themes that you'll hear in my legislation, and certainly in these bills that I'm going to talk about right now, are preserving our existing affordable neighborhoods. That's something we really need to be careful and focus on. So one of the more important bills is fixing the circumstance that came out of the Palmer case a few years ago. The Palmer case said that inclusionary housing is not something that cities can mandate as part of a development. There was another case that said the opposite, but we need a legislative fix to make the law clear on that. It's been tried twice before, has not succeeded yet, but I think this is a good year. There was a reason why the judge didn't sign a bill that was passed through the legislature a couple of years ago, because there was still pending legislation, pending litigation. That litigation is ended, and so it's timely now. Another big deal bill, but very, very steep climb that I'm carrying is a repeal of the Costa-Hawkins Act. So I don't really need to say much more about that. I mean, it's pretty simple. That's what the bill does. We're proposing a mechanism by which affordable housing projects that are nearing the end of their lifespan as affordable projects, because you know most affordable projects, affordable housing projects, are deed restricted for a fixed period of years, 30, 40, 50 years. And many of those projects are beginning to approach the end of that lifetime, and once that protection is over, they go to market value. So we're trying to propose something that requires the owners of those buildings to first offer them to an affordable housing provider, providing that the a fair market price is paid for them. This will allow municipal governments like your own to bid on those projects, and hopefully, I don't think by this legislation we'll be able to save all of them, but it will provide an opportunity to keep those as affordable housing projects. And if we're successful in this, they would then be permanently affordable because they would be owned by an affordable housing provider. Also coming out of the ghost ship tragedy, we have a bill that would redefine live-work space and what that means. And the idea is to define it in such a way that it focuses on the building and safety requirements that are so important for keeping a a housing complex safe, but still allowing them to maintain their character and their affordability. The Coastal Commission, a few decades ago, I think it was back in the early 80s, when it was initially formed, had the jurisdiction to require affordable housing as part of a housing development in the coastal zone that it had jurisdiction over. That jurisdiction was taken over was removed by the legislature back in the early to mid 80s. It was controversial. Builders didn't like it. And so the legislature, which back then was a much more conservative legislature, removed the ability to do that. I have a bill that would restore the Coastal Commission's discretion to require affordability, something that's very important in the coastal zone, which is becoming less and less affordable each and every day. And finally, I last year carried a bill that wasn't successful, partly because the governor took my bill, put it in the budget, added a CEQA exemption to it. It became very, very controversial very, very quickly, and nothing became of it. We're reintroducing that legislation that would allow for permit streamlining so that it is easier to build market rate projects. It would retain CEQA protections, but providing that you're not removing existing affordable units and not displacing tenants, and that you've complied with CEQA and a few other important criteria, you would have a streamlined process through a planning department. And finally, I should just mention that affordable housing funding is extremely important. We don't have, since the end of redevelopment, a significant stream of money that is dedicated to affordable housing. I've got a couple of ideas on that. They're still conceptual only. One of them has to do with reforming one of our tax laws. So you'll be hearing more about that one and those two in the future.
Thank you very much, Assemblymember.
Sorry for taking so long.
No worries. Thank you for the information. It's very valuable. I would like to get a snapshot of what has happened in the region, and for that, particularly with the Ellis Act and how it has impacted West Hollywood, and for that I would like to ask Peter Noonan, our Rent Stabilization and Housing Manager, to briefly give us a little bit of understanding of what has happened. And then I'm going to ask Larry, because Larry this morning had an important press conference, and WehoBill reflected that information in today's publication. So Peter, if you will.
Sure. Thank you, and welcome. Thank you all for coming.
Speaking to the mic so people at home make sure that can hear.
Sure, and just let me know if you can't hear me. Is this better? All right, great,
and sorry,
thank you.
One second, Peter. I omitted, and Andy reminded me, if you are at home or you are here in the audience and you use social media, we are using the hashtag WehoEllis Act Forum. So WehoEllis Act Forum. Thank you, Peter. So go proceed.
Okay, well, I will be somewhat brief, but I did want to provide a little bit of information and context on Ellis and how it's impacted here in West Hollywood and in the region. So as Allison was explaining, Ellis does apply to an entire property. And so when a property does go through Ellis, it is that all of the units are taken off of the rental market. So we know, we've been keeping records, and we know that since Ellis was enacted here in West Hollywood, that we've had 203 properties. This is as of last November. 203 properties have been withdrawn from the market, and that is 764 units. It equals about 4.5% of our total rent-stabilized housing stock here in the city. When we look regionally, since the enactment of Ellis, about 3% of rent-stabilized housing has been withdrawn from the market. Now, affordable housing has been built in that time period. And for instance, here in West Hollywood, we've actually built more affordable units through our inclusionary housing program and through partnerships with nonprofit housing providers. However, that's not the case for the region. And we know that LA and the LA region in general is one of the most unaffordable areas. And so when we look regionally, it's a very different story. But beyond the numbers, I think it's important for us to remember that the impact that Ellis can have on our communities and on those tenants that are being displaced. And perhaps that's the real story, and the real impact on Ellis is that we know that most people in the LA region, including West Hollywood, are renters. I think 75% of us here in the city are renters. And so this can have a profound impact throughout the region. And we know that with rising rents, if someone is going to, when they are facing dislocation, it's very hard to find rents that are somewhat comparable or even affordable to, some people are chuckling, to pay in their communities. So this means that not only is it losing your home, but it perhaps is losing your community. It's being dislocated out and perhaps even moving farther and farther out just to find that affordability. So I could say that although I think that we're doing many things right here in West Hollywood, and we have been successful and able to have affordable housing produced at a level that's a little bit higher than the number of units that have been lost to Ellis, there's still a greater need and a very an essential need for affordable housing. So,
Thank you, Peter. Larry, if you can give us a little bit of information about what happened this morning with your, and if you're going to stand up, I just want to remind you, you are live and you're on a shot. So if you start walking, you're going to be off the shot. So yeah, I was looking at what Senator Allen was doing walking, and the cameras were grabbing him perfectly, but just so you know.
Well, Hernan, since you referred to age, thank you for that.
Ooh, that stinger.
I guess I'll take my position as elder statesman. I never thought that would happen. The elder part, but definitely not the statesperson part. And it is an honor to be here with your esteemed state representatives and your local representatives, but more importantly, it's an honor to be here with you all from West Hollywood, because the residents of West Hollywood is what makes West Hollywood what it is. And you need to know the role that you have played over the years in fighting for tenants' rights and affordable housing. And CES began organizing in West Hollywood, before it was a city, in 1977 or so. And we've organized communities. We put pressure on the Board of Supervisors, so unincorporated area, and we got rent control. And then in 1980, when the conservatives took over the Board of Supervisors and threatened to do away with rent control, we were able to get them to continue it for a couple of years, and then we placed the only initiative ever to make on the LA County ballot, Proposition M, in 1983. It was a rent control initiative. It went down to defeat because in the other outlining areas, it was mainly homeowners, and they raised millions of dollars and told the homeowners that homeless were going to come into their community, the locusts were going to come in if rent control passed. It was a lawyer full employment bill. But in West Hollywood, we won by 5.5 to 1. And so we said, well, if they're not going to give us rent control, we're going to take it all. And it was just a year after that we organized the effort to incorporate this city, a city that was born and raised on rent control. And I don't know if you know, there's a song, and every time I hear it, I think of West Hollywood. It's by Jefferson Starship. It says, "We built this city on rock and roll." Every time I hear that song, I hear, we built this city on rent control.
Larry, you should run for
and
office.
a little bit of rock and roll.
I ask you,
Well,
and to the point.
That's, I'm an organizer.
Thank you, Larry. I'm
so,
just joking.
So just so you know that over the years, we were able to stop the passage of the Costa-Hawkins bill because of people in this city, because your representative at the time was Senator David Roberti, and every time that bill came up, he killed it in Judiciary Committee. Unfortunately, term limits came around, and this is the bad thing about term limits, knocked him out, and it was soon after that bill got through. The Ellis Act was enacted in 1985. It was because of these guys in Santa Monica, but we love them because it was a strong rent control law, but they weren't allowing small landlords to get out of the rental business. So the Ellis Act originally was adopted basically to allow small landlords to get out of the rental business because they couldn't operate it. Unfortunately, what we've seen over the years is big developers have taken over that and have corrupted the Ellis Act. And that's why one of the reasons it needs to go. And so what we're seeing, our work here in Los Angeles, is we're seeing Ellis Act evictions throughout the city. We just released an interactive online map that shows all the Ellis evictions that have taken place in the city of Los Angeles. From 2001 through 2016, the city of Los Angeles have lost 21,200 rent-controlled units, and it's spreading throughout the city. And these are big developers who are taking it over. They've only owned the property for the most part for less than a year, and they're just acquiring this property for the sole purpose of kicking out the tenants and knocking down the rent-controlled units and building luxury high-rises. So one of the things over the years, we've been trying to fight the Ellis Act year in and year out. Senator Sheila Kuehl at the time tried to do it, but the real estate lobby was too powerful. We are now lucky to have these representatives, Senator Allen and Assemblyman Bloom, sorry, for fighting on your behalf. We have not had these type of bills put up there with the ability to try and get it through, and so your role in this is historic, and that role needs to continue on, and you need to be involved in this effort to help get these bills through, because the only way we can counter the real estate interest is through people power. And people power, just like we have in this room, in this city, in Santa Monica, and other rent-controlled cities, we now have tenant groups throughout the state have been working with Assemblymember Bloom's staff in trying to lay out a path to victory and how we can approach these bills, but it's going to take all of you. So if the one thing you go away from here today is that you have to be involved in this issue. Now you have support of your representatives, but you have friends, families in other parts. You got to get them involved, and together we can get this change and save our affordable housing in West Hollywood and throughout the state.
Thank you, Larry. And we are going to talk before the forum ends. We are going to talk about how we are going to organize, and we'll get to that point. But I do want to give an opportunity to Assemblymember Bloom, who authored the bill, and Senator Allen is a co-author of Assembly Bill 982. Assembly Bill 982. If anyone would like to get a copy of that bill, they can go to the legislature's website, or they can just email me at the City of West Hollywood, or call our office, and we will email you the link to the bill. So,
or if you just want to Google AB 982 California 2017, you'll get the.
Yeah, make sure that you put this year, because you may get other years' bills.
Right. That bill number has been used in past years, so you definitely want to put 2017 in there.
So would you tell us about Assembly Bill 982?
Sure. Let me start by saying the bill is not a panacea. It doesn't get rid of the Ellis Act. What it does is it reforms it in an important way. So the Ellis Act provides that if one wants to go out of the business of being a landlord, the landlord has to give 120 days notice to all tenants, but there's an exemption, or an exception, I should say, for seniors and for those with disabilities. And for those individuals, the notice period is a year. What my bill does is it says that everyone in the building, if there's a disabled person there or a senior person in the building, everybody in the building is entitled to a 1-year notice. That's significant because in most buildings you're going to find at least one senior or one disabled person, and so we think the majority of cases it will lead to a 1-year notification period being required in entire buildings. And in a nutshell, that's what the bill does.
Thank you. Senator Allen, do you have any thoughts about the bill? And because last session, if I recall correctly, I think it was Senate Bill 1269 or 1229. Sorry for not remembering exactly the number. You attempted to do something about the Ellis Act, but you were not able. I won't tell the story. Go ahead and tell us a little bit.
So having served on the school board and given my interest in education, my take on this issue was, well, I think we're all trying to figure out, ways that we can make some reforms that will make a big difference to people that could actually pass muster through the legislature, because it's proven to be very, very difficult to make any changes to the Ellis Act given the politics. And so I think that Richard's bill in this area is a really smart idea, and in some respects it kind of comes out of sort of a logical next step to what we were trying to do last year, where we thought to ourselves, okay, well, we're already extending this 1 year notice to folks who are elderly or disabled, but there's an enormous portion of the population that have school-aged children for whom an Ellis eviction is incredibly disruptive, and that for families with children, we ought to extend that, we ought to give them that same 1 year eviction notice. And that, unfortunately, we weren't even able to get it out of the Senate Transportation and Housing Committee, given sort of the politics at play. Now, I think one of the things that was mentioned several times was that ultimately there are so many buildings with a disabled or elderly person in the building that it's not ultimately that onerous for an owner to have to do something similar to what Richard's calling for. And I think actually his bill ultimately should be easier to pass than mine, because the apartment owners already have to give 1 year notice to elderly and disabled people under the Ellis Act as it currently exists. So they can't clear out the building and totally redo the building if there's an elderly or home or disabled person in the building when they decide to give notice. So all he's saying is, let's just extend that protection to everybody in the building, because they can't clear out the building for a year anyway. So I think it's actually a more clever way of trying to protect more people. And that's why I'm a strong supporter of Richard's bill. And I think that it will extend protections to folks. We all know how disruptive Ellis Act evictions can be, and Larry certainly spoke to that. The landlords can't clear out the buildings already, so let's make sure that we extend those protections to everybody in the building.
Larry?
So that's absolutely true. And another reason, there's a flip side to that of what we see and why this bill is so important is, yes, they can't evict seniors and disabled for a year, but we've seen situations where it ends up where the senior or disabled are the last remaining tenants, and they're there by themselves, and then they are exposed to enormous amount of harassment and pressure to get out. There's security issues there because they're alone there, and sometimes lights are going out and things like that. So the importance of this bill is to ensure their security there and extend it, and there's no question. The other part of it is that tenants shouldn't have to file. So we had this situation that got a lot of publicity in Westwood here, that Councilmember Paul Koretz worked with him. 200 seniors in Westwood were served eviction notice. They got 120 days. These were very elderly, in their 80s, 90s, 100s. They don't have necessarily the ability to sign the papers, get them in requesting the 1 year notice. So if it's 1 year across the board, there's no question about it. Everyone's protected, and they have that security.
Assemblymember Bloom, this bill was just introduced and now has been referred to Housing and Community Development in the Assembly.
Correct. Housing Committee, yes.
The Housing. And when do you foresee the bill being heard? March, April?
I think it's likely sometime around the end of the month or in April.
Good. Because that's important for people to know. There is a process. Bills go through a process. And the good thing about this bill is not only that Assemblymember Bloom, who is obviously very sympathetic to this issue and has expertise on getting these bills passed, it's also good that Senator Allen is a co-author because he will carry the bill in the Senate when it goes to the Senate. But in order to reach the Senate, it has to go through Housing and Community Development, perhaps a different committee as well, a second committee.
We think it's possible that this bill might only be single referred.
A single referred.
It doesn't need to go to the Appropriations Committee, in our view.
And then it will
is
go
good
to the
if
floor.
It only has to go through one committee. It's a simpler process.
So maybe you could tell us about the members on the committee. What are the chances, who we need to focus in on in getting their support?
You need to focus on every member of the committee, and I prefer not to name names because I won't remember everybody who's on the committee. We have only recently.
And we will have that information available on our website
That's
on Monday.
easy enough to look it out, and you're going to be organized in providing lists and phone numbers and instructions for how to contact the various members. Once it passes through the Housing Committee, and I should say that the chair of the Housing Committee is David Chu. He is a strong supporter of this bill. And of most of the housing measures that are going to be coming through his committee. So he will be an advocate for this bill, and that will help us get it through the committee. Once it's through the committee, if it is only single referred to the one committee, then it will go to the Assembly floor, where we will need a simple majority, 41 votes, to get it passed. We haven't started counting votes yet to see where those votes will come from. I would say my experience is getting the first 25 votes on something like this is relatively easy. The next challenge is the next 16 votes to put you over 41, and we'll need to pay particular attention to who the critical individuals are that we'll want you to contact at that phase.
And soon we are going to talk about how the city, with all of you, and Assemblymember Bloom's office, and Senator Allen, and CES, we are going to get together to support the bill. Helene, I don't know if you have any thoughts right now, or you prefer to address the strategy later, how we are going to organize. Is your mic on?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
This is Helene Meshard, by the way.
Thank you. I think that I can only just reiterate what everything has been said, that it is so critical to be vocal on this issue and to be vocal when the time is right, which means that we all need to be very diligent and very closely watch what's going on and be sure to provide the support and the information that will help our legislators, both Senator Allen and Assemblyman Bloom, move these bills successfully through both houses of the legislature.
Great. So I know that some of you may have questions or comments. I'm going to go ahead and call the people who signed up, but if you haven't signed up and you still want to ask a question or have a comment, just raise your hand. Let me take care of this first. Because we have several of you here in the room, we are going to time, so you can use your minute to either give a comment or ask a question. So the first person that has submitted a speaker slip, and again, if you did not submit a speaker slip, I'll still call you. It's Donald Emlet. So Donald, if you could please come to the mic and just tell your name, city of residence, and you'll have 1 minute.
Hi, good evening, Donald Elmblad, a landlord in the city of West Hollywood. This is difficult. I may be the only one here, but I was a registered Democrat since 1964. I moved to Berkeley in 1974, managed a rent-controlled building there, moved here in 1980, was a tenant for 15 years in a 4-unit property. When my landlady passed away, I bought the property. I am 100% in support of the Ellis Act in Costa-Hawkins. It restores property rights to landlords, property owners, and the people who pay taxes. And what you're doing is worse than what Donald Trump is doing to healthcare. Thank you. I just think it's ridiculous. When I bought my property, I had a tenant paying $150 a month. He'd lived there 48 years. When he moved away, he died 3 months later. He had $500,000 in the bank.
Thank you, Donald.
I mean, this is crazy. I'm
Thank you. Amanda Goodwin, followed by Rob Bergstein.
I get just a quick.
Yes, go ahead,
A
Ben.
quick kind of. I understand the story you told, but I don't see how that would mean that we shouldn't give, people notice before you're kicking them out of the building. I understand. I mean, you were making a critique about the Costa-Hawkins bill or the Ellis Act bill?
Okay.
But the bill, just to make sure everyone knows, the bill that he's proposing says that if you want to do that, which you're allowed to do, you already have to give a year's notice if you have anybody who's disabled or elderly in the building, and all we're doing is providing that same service to the other people in the building, the very same building where you have to provide them 1 year's notice anyway.
We have to move on to Amanda Goodwin. So thank you, Senator. Amanda.
Hi, Amanda Goodwin. I lost Donald's vote because I support repealing the Ellis Act. I'm also a landlord. I look at all of you people, and most of you are renters, and you want to stay here. And nobody wants to be kicked out of their homes, and I think us as landlords have a responsibility. People might say, hey, if you can't afford to live in West Hollywood, live somewhere else. Well, you know what? If you don't like the laws of buying a building in West Hollywood, then don't buy a building in West Hollywood. We make really good money here as landlords, especially if we bought our buildings in the last 40, 20 years. We bought ours in 2000. It's reasonable. I think I'm going to take it a step further. I think when we Ellis people out, we should pay them a lot of money. A lot of money. Because if developers are going to make money off of these developments, then the tenants who have lived here a long time, like my dad's lived in his apartment for 42 years, they deserve to have a quality of life, and we need to protect that. Thank you,
Amanda. Rob Bergstein.
Rob Bergstein. I'm a resident of the city of West Hollywood. I'm also the owner of a rent-stabilized housing in the city of West Hollywood, and until recently a small property rent-controlled city of Los Angeles. So while I can't imagine the devastation that a tenant would be going through when they are Ellis out of their building for no cause of their own, and as we talked about that, we may lose them as residents of the city because there's no place for them to go. On the other hand, I want to recognize the rights of those of us who do own property. For people like me, and I'm not that unusual, this is the largest investment. The bulk of what I'm worth on paper is my little property in West Hollywood. So at what point do the rights that I have as a property owner get subverted to the rights of a tenant? We have very strong rent control ordinance in the city of West Hollywood. There were strong controls for my city of LA units, but at some point there has to be a balance to recognize that we do invest in these properties and we have a right to do with them within certain confines as we please. So that's what I'm asking for, some kind of a balance between both the tenants and the property owners. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Does anyone would like to answer that?
Sure. I don't disagree with that statement at all. But I think we have to recognize that we are in the midst of a crisis of affordability, not just here in West Hollywood, but really throughout Southern California and the state. The intention of all of my bills is to lay on the table a variety of different potential solutions. I recognize that there is an economic consequence to landlords, and I think we have to understand and respect that and acknowledge it in our deliberation around these bills. But there is also a severe economic consequence that has been getting worse and worse and worse for tenants and those who are seeking housing. In my view, housing is a basic right, so this is a critical issue that we must pay attention to. But I think your points are meaningful, and we should be having a dialogue around them.
Thank you. I'm going to take a question from Ivy, and I'll hold the mic for you.
Oh, can I, since
Yes, absolutely.
since Ivy is going to be asking a question or making a point here, I would like to introduce, for those of you, probably everybody here knows Ivy Bottini, but let me introduce Ivy Bottini, who we have a Woman of the Year program in the State Assembly, where every year each Assembly member gets to identify one woman who has contributed to her community in important ways. And this year, the Assembly District 50 Woman of the Year is Ivy Bottini. So please give her a round of applause.
No, you want to come to the mic? I was going to hold your mic, Ivy.
Don't ask me a tough question now. I was really nice.
I'm shrinking. First, let me thank Assemblyman Bloom for the honor he just mentioned. Couple of things. I think when we talk about the Ellis Act, there are human beings that are caught in this. We don't talk about the human beings. We talk about the law, or, what you can do now, what you can't do now, but I don't ever seem to hear the stories of people who have been caught in it. It's absolutely horrendous, because a lot of the people who rent in West Hollywood are people who helped found this city and helped fight the fight and beat Briggs and beat LaRouche and go through the AIDS epidemic. These are human beings, and where are they going to go? Where are they going to go? There's no place in West Hollywood they can afford. They mostly are retired people, and as Dan Moran, he was in his unit 37 years, and he had nowhere to go. Well, he's now my roommate.
Ivy,
And
Ivy.
I'm nearly done. And I really urge you to put faces on when you have a discussion. Put elderly people and people with disabilities and people who are being Ellis'd out, put them in a bus. Take them to Sacramento. Send them to Sacramento. Just keep them coming in, flooding in. Let the lawmakers have to look at them. And sometimes invite one to tell the story. That's how we'll get rid of the Ellis Act.
Thank you, Ivy.
So if I could address that.
Hold on one second.
So Ivy, I think you're right on target. It's interesting because today we did this news conference releasing this map of LA Ellis Act evictions. I was talking with the LA Times reporter, and he was saying, he was talking numbers, 21,200. I said, yes, but you have to remember, that's not just mortar and bricks. Each one of those units represents a family that was struggling, that was evicted. And once you get evicted under the Ellis Act, you're not being just evicted out of your home. You're likely being evicted out of your city, possibly the state, and in some cases the country. There was a gentleman there, a tenant, who was at our news conference. He lived for 16 years in a building in the Westlake area. He had special needs daughter who had the services right around that area. He was evicted and he couldn't find anything. He ended up paying double the rent, living on 84th Street and Western Avenue in South LA. And now he has to try and figure out how to get up to where his school was and where the services are for the daughter. So the issues of displacement are much more than just losing the roof over your head. It has a tremendous, devastating impact on the families who live in those units. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you, Larry. Gentlemen.
My name is Dale Kendall, and I also was born and raised in Los Angeles and also went to Fairfax High School. I am a landlord, and I think the worst thing that is happening to our city is the Ellis Act. It is broken. People are being evicted from their apartments when they've lived there 20 years. Where are they supposed to go? The landlords have bought buildings. They paid 20 years ago not that much for their buildings. Their buildings are worth a lot more. If I was to have your bill, I'm sure is good, it is a Band-Aid on a broken system. This has to go. I could talk here for an hour about this, but this is my bill if I could have one. If you want to Ellis a building, you have to own it for 5 years before you Ellis Act it. And after you Ellis Act it, you can't rent it or you can demolish it or do what you want, but you cannot rent it for 5 more years after you Ellis Act it. That's getting out of the rental business. If that's what Ellis Act is about getting out of the rental business, let them get out of the business. I mean, this is by greedy developers. I have a friend. She's lived there 20 years. She was Ellis Acted out. I don't want to get into it, but there's issues with her. No, I just want to finish this. I'm really, really upset about this. This is a broken thing. This is for greedy developers to make a lot of money in a short amount of time. And if you have bought a building and you're saying that your tenant is paying you low rent, you bought that building at a low price.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, I am really upset by this.
We'll use your anger as a motivator to change this bill.
We
So
have
thank you.
to change this bill. And I own property in this, several pieces of property. I am outraged by the Ellis Act. I didn't even know about it until a few years ago. Never heard of it until friends of mine are being Ellis Act.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Dan
you for
Morin.
the comment. I would only point out, I think your point is well taken. We in the legislature have to work within the realms of what's realistic, what we think we can accomplish. And so that guides us in the things that we propose.
Thank you. Dan?
Dan Moore in West Hollywood. I guess I'm responsible for this, and I'm so grateful to John D'Amico, and I do want to right a wrong. Inadvertently at Monday night's council meeting, I completely forgot, and I apologize, to thank Councilmember Horvath for her co-sponsoring this event. So I hope I make it up to you by this. It's been, after 37 years in the same apartment, having moved here in 1978, it was wow. It was really traumatic for me to be forced out of my building through no fault of my own. I thought, turning 73 next month, that this was going to be the end. So 5 days before my 72nd birthday, I was kicked to the curb. And it was, if it wasn't for Ivy Bottini, I don't know what would happen. I'm really sorry, but this is a very emotional issue for me. I just wanted to say 2 things that I've said before, and I also thank Councilmember D'Amico, of course. I realize that the mother's milk of politics is money, and it seems like Citizens United is the mother of the mother. I understand, when I brought this before the council before, the issue was we have to go through the legislature. My position has been, why do some of the rent control cities band together? This was decided, just to clarify what you said, is this was decided in the California Supreme Court. And then Nash appealed it to the US Supreme Court and it was denied. So why can't we go through also a legislative process, the cities band together, deny the Ellis Act, trigger a court battle, and have it wind up and see where it goes? Because if we didn't, then we wouldn't have had the SCOTUS decision for same-gender marriage. Okay, sorry I got so verklempt, but it's an issue for me.
Thank you very much, Dan. Yola, you wanted to say something. I'll take the mic to you. You have 1 minute. I just want to remind people to keep it brief so people can also say what they need to say. I'll hold it for you. I never give up them out.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, Yola Dore, sorry, West Hollywood. I just wanted to ask Assemblymember Bloom if he would explain in depth a little bit more about the amnesty bill to landlords he mentioned, because I'm wondering if that will allow slumlords, if you will, to continue getting away with their issues here.
No,
Concerned.
It's intended to actually allow landlords who might be what we would define as slumlords now to bring their buildings up to code. If they don't, they should still be subject to the law and not be allowed to do business the way they're currently doing business. But we want those buildings to be safe. We don't want them to be slums. We want to have buildings like the building in Oakland be available for artists and creative people who don't have a heck of a lot of money to spend on rent and don't mind living in what might be considered an alternative living space, not your traditional living space, but it needs to be safe and up to code.
Thank you, Assemblymember. Susie Shannon.
Hi, thank you so much for being here tonight and for putting through your legislation. I just wanted to point out, because I know a lot of landlords are here tonight, that yes, we do want to recognize that there are rights for landlords, but a lot of folks who are Ellis'd out actually can't find an apartment and can't find affordable housing and end up homeless. This is a homeless capital of the United States, and there is a cost to taxpayers for homelessness, which is about $25,000 to $35,000 per person that can't get into permanent affordable housing. So we do need to look at this as a community issue. There's also a lot of research that shows that forced displacement of people who are elderly actually shortens their lifespan, prevents them from having access to doctors. So we really need to stop this. I mean, we don't really have public housing, real public housing anymore, because a lot of it is being privatized, and we're not building any new housing. So really what we're seeing here is just a give and take between private landlords and what the government can do in terms of restrictions. So anything we can do to prevent evictions at this point, I think is really important. And I know there are relocation fees. Most people go through their relocation fees within a year because their rent is so high when they have to move.
Thank you very much. Richard Maggio.
Good evening, Richard Maggio. I've lived here all my life. I presently serve as the chair of the Rent Stabilization Commission. $48,600 is considered low income in West Hollywood. Can you imagine if you made that in Topeka, Kansas, you'd be living a pretty good life. But if you're 62 or older and you meet that bar of $48,600, you're allowed 1 year notice if you're Ellis and approximately $20,600. And I hope we can find a way to increase that number. You just cannot start your life over at $20,600. And I hope that would be looked at very closely. Thank you.
And your parents knew that story very well. James Fremas? Francis? Sorry about that. You have 1 minute.
Hi there. James Francis here in West Hollywood. Just speaking on behalf
Speaking
of
to the mic so people at home can hear you.
Speaking on behalf of personal experience, and I'd like to address Assemblymember Bloom because I used to be a former resident of Santa Monica. I wanted to say that recently, as a month ago, the Beverly Hills Courier stated that they had a form just like this, and landlords were saying, well, if people can't afford Beverly Hills, then they can move to Hawaiian Gardens. It was actually 10% before they capped it at 3%, where they were getting $5,000 to $10,000 a month as landlords. People cannot afford this. What's happening is that there was an elderly woman who threatened to jump off her roof because she could not afford the rent. My roommate, when I used to live in Santa Monica 15 years ago, did commit suicide because he did not want to move out of his unit. And I had to find his body. I shouldn't have to encounter that. No one should have to encounter that. And after that, my landlord harassed me, said I was forging his checks, I was doing something illegal. I tried to write an article for the Santa Monica Daily Press. He went to the stores, and he kept on stealing them with his attorney.
Thank you, James. Your time is up.
Sorry.
Thank you very much.
All right, so it's 8:40, and we have the bill introduced, but we need to make sure that we pass the bill. So we have heard, obviously, testimony from most people who would like to get this bill passed. In order for you to get this bill passed, for the community to see this bill passed, we need to work together. So what do you need from us? I think we touched on a little bit, but if you had a wish list of things that you would like people to do, other than contacting your office and joining you in this fight, what is it that you would like us to do?
We did start to talk about this earlier, and I think it's the, by and large, and Ben, you may want to add on to this, but it's the things that you know about. It's writing letters, it's making phone calls, it's being an activist. It's something that the people of West Hollywood are well practiced in and very good at. I hesitate to take you away from your activism at the national level, because I know you're very active in that resistance. But if you could spend a little bit of your time working on this issue also locally, I think it will pay big dividends. Let not just your local elected officials in Sacramento, who you have right here with you, but let others, those who are on the relevant committee, when it gets to the floor, those who are critical votes on the floor, let them know how you feel about it, and talk to your friends in other communities and make sure that they're doing what they can in the same vein.
Senator Allen, do you have any thoughts about it?
I think Richard said it well. I would just sort of emphasize the fact that that this is a reasonable bill. This is a bill that will make a big difference for a lot of the very people that he was talking about, and not jam up landlords' property rights, because they have to give 1 year's notice anyway. So it's a reasonable bill, and it really deserves to get its way through. And I would just say that obviously your representatives are very much in support of this, but I really do emphasize, I mean, ultimately people really do care about their own constituents. Members of the legislature care about hearing from their constituents. So to the extent to which you have colleagues and friends from other parts of the state who want to weigh in, I really do encourage you to do so. I know there's actually one member of the Housing Committee, for example, actually represents an area just north of here, Raul Bocanegra, who represents portions of the San Fernando Valley. And it's a reasonable bill. This is not something that's overturning the whole system, and it will make a big difference for a lot of people. And I think it's important to tell those personal stories and emphasize that.
Ivy, no, hold on. She wants to know what the mood in the assembly is.
On housing issues, I think there is this year an awareness like never before, not just in the legislature, but I think amongst the public, that we have a real crisis on our hands that needs to be addressed. And I think you're seeing the outcome of that in voting on ballot measures like we saw a couple of days ago when Prop S went down to defeat. But you're also seeing it in the volume of bills that are passing through the legislature and the interest amongst not just a couple of legislators, but a large number of legislators.
I just want to point out that Assemblymember Bloom's staffer, Josh Kerpies, is in the back. He's got clipboards where you can sign up to get on the email list.
And so does Senator Allen,
get
staff,
alerts
Fernando Morales,
about the bill. So go ahead and sign up so that you can keep track of where the bill is in its path to passage, and you can get alerts about when the best time is to make your voice heard.
If I could make a suggestion to those who are going to be doing the actual organizing, typically the outreach is send an email to the following 10 people because they're the important people on the committee. But I think if you also tell folks what areas those people represent and ask the people you're reaching out to, if you know somebody in that community, ask that person to contact their assembly member or senator. It's meaningful as you want it to be, right? When you contact me, you want to tell me, I'm one of your constituents, and here's my opinion about the following matter. And that is important to us, in the legislature. So if you know somebody who is in Raul Bocanegra's district, that's a key person to be in touch with and to ask to make that contact.
Yeah, and particularly because Assemblymember Bocanegra or Assemblymember Chu are in the Housing Committee, and those are people who are going to be voting on this bill. But one of the things, and I'll get to you, Senator, right now.
The other LA members, Ed Chow, I think he's on the committee too, and he represents sort of Monterey Park area.
And one of the things I just want to let you know that the city of West Hollywood, along the city of Berkeley, and I'm looking at Allison now, we are members of what is called the Rent Stabilization Consortium, which is a state consortium, and Allison attends those meetings. And Allison, you may want to talk about how we had that call and we talked to them, and then how they are going to, or what is the idea of organizing, as Assemblymember Bloom mentioned.
Yeah, so the other rent control jurisdictions around the state are also very supportive of this legislation, and hopefully they'll be working with Larry at CES to really organize tenants groups around the state and to tell those personal stories, to bring people to Sacramento when the time is appropriate, to really show the legislators that this is all about people and that people are really in support of these bills, because there's a strong lobby, a very powerful realtors lobby against it. So it really is about people, as Larry mentioned earlier.
Larry?
So these are all excellent suggestions. We need to do all of that. I also want to stress what Ivy raised, that the human face on this issue is really important, especially in the legislators who might be swing votes. And so again, if you know anybody who is in any other district and has a situation, they should be contacting us or other organizations. It's also important that people know their rights, that a lot of these evictions may not be legal. And if people don't know, we run a tenants' rights clinic twice a week, CES Tenants' Rights Clinic in Plummer Park on Saturday mornings at 10 and on Wednesday evenings at 7. And we have volunteer attorneys. It's one-to-one counseling. So you find out whether or not that eviction you might be receiving is legal or not. But it's going to take a lot of work. The real estate lobby is very strong in Sacramento, but we have the energy, we have the people, and the issue is on our side, so we just have to fight.
Larry, if you could please tell the audience what your website is, because they can join your organization and then work with the coalition.
It's cesinaction.org.
cesinaction.org. Thank you. So it's getting, it's 8:50. I'm going to take the last comment. If you please approach the mic. Anthony Wise. Anthony Wise, followed by Steve Luffman.
Hi, I'm Anthony Weiss. I've actually crossed over from East Hollywood to be here. But I appreciate the work you're doing, both with the Ellis Act and Costa-Hawkins to deal with displacement, which I think is a big issue for all the reasons that people have laid out. But Assemblymember Bloom, as you mentioned, the legislative analyst report talked about how, alongside that, and I think in a lot of ways underlying the pressures behind the rising rents, the rising incentive to push people out, is the massive housing shortage, both in the region and statewide. And are there any bills that you have seen or are supporting or are pushing that you think could address that housing shortage in a substantial fashion?
Thank you for your question.
There was last year's bill on ADUs, and this year my bill to provide an easier process for certain projects that preserve existing neighborhoods and also comply with CEQA and a couple of other things.
Thank you.
Two other things to mention. There's SB2 and SB3. So SB2 is Senator Atkins, SB3 Senator Bell. They're two bills to provide additional funding for affordable housing. And then Senator Wiener from San Francisco has a very interesting bill that you should check out called SB35.
Thank you very much. And so you know, on our website, on the Legislative Affairs page of the city's website, which is www.weho.org, we will have more information about these housing bills and how you can get plugged in with what's happening. So, Mr. Leftman.
Hello, thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. 3 years ago, I was Ellis. My home of 19 years was bought 2 months before I was Ellis by developers. They wanted to tear down our affordable 9-unit building. I was one of, other people were living there much longer than I was, actually. They wanted to tear it down to build 11 multi-million-dollar townhouses. This really affects families. These are people who really create our neighborhood. It was right over the border in LA. It was a historic building. We actually stopped them from tearing it down, but they Ellis did anyways, and it's sitting empty right now. One of the ideas that was floated in this last council race by a friend who was running for council who did not win was to have a vacancy tax. I know many units in the city, I especially heard Jeff Palmer has many empty floors that he will not lower the rent on. Instead, they just sit empty or are rented on Airbnb. The vacancy tax is used in Berlin, and I was wondering if that could be done here to get those units. It's my understanding that buildings built after 1990, I think the vacancy is around 20%, while buildings that are covered on rent control, it's about 2.7%.
So I
Go ahead,
just wanted to tell another part of the story that Stephen didn't mention, is that his landlord with Matthew Jacobs, who was the chairperson of the California Housing Finance Agency, the state agency with the goal and the mission to build affordable housing, and this guy was destroying affordable housing. We mounted a major campaign, got a lot of publicity, and we forced Matthew Jacobs to resign. And so those are the type of stories we need to highlight. The hypocrisy in this person's effort to get you out was outrageous, and the pressure built, and he was forced out. So,
thank you very much.
And it took his fight to do that.
It was a year and a half of my life I gave to do it, so yes.
Thank you. Richard K. Or Cynthia Blatt, followed by, I'm getting to that point in my life where I have to wear glasses. I never thought that would happen. Lauren Robinson, I think it says here. Or Johnson. Lauren Johnson.
Hi, Cynthia Blatt, West Hollywood. So I've kind of thought that the Ellis Act and what's been happening with it is a result, one of the ripple effects from the state density bonus laws. Because what's happened with the state density bonus laws is it's made, it didn't mean to, I don't think, but it's made so-called desirable areas more desirable to developers. So if you have, yes, the Ellis Act has a human face on both sides of it. I think the tenants suffer more than the landlords suffer. However, they suffer too. And I think that if we work to preserve the housing, what you're doing with your bill is a good idea. But what about earmarking funds? What about looking at incentivizing landlords to keep their buildings? Because if they're building, if they need help to maintain their buildings, and a developer comes along because the area is quote unquote desirable, then that landlord may have no choice but to sell that building. And that's what's happened in West Hollywood. Buildings are being sold all over the place rather than preserving the housing. Now, as a result of the density bonus laws, paradoxically, and Ellis, we've lost hundreds of thousands of units of housing in Southern California. So why aren't we looking at ways to incentivize landlords to keep their buildings, preserve their housing, and maybe let half the building go market rate so that they could still get federal, state, and local funding?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Lauren Johnson. And then I have one more question that was written out, and then we are going to go to closing statements. And
hi, yes, I'd like to say that I agree with what that lady was just saying.
Closer to
you
the
know,
mic,
you're forcing owners of buildings to give up their buildings, leave them empty when people could be living in them, and for doing so, you're actually fining them, harassing them, and, you know, making their life hell. I mean, these people worked hard to buy these properties. You know, the affordable housing market should be run on a cooperative basis, or organisations, even the renters themselves, getting together and forming cooperatives and buying their own buildings. And that way, you know, people aren't going to be thrown out of their homes. You know, it's just ridiculous. You know, the elderly should be protected a year. I don't know about that. You know, but the Act itself, there's a lot of problems with it, there's a lot of wrong in it, and people are taking up and making it personal when, you know, it's almost like a social estate. I mean, if you buy a property, well, it automatically becomes the tenants, not the owners. It's crazy.
Thank you for your comment. So I have one written question, and it says, I'd like to address the, no name, by the way. Oh yeah, there is name. Leslie Carlis, I think it says there. It says, I'd like you to address the proposal precluding landlords from increasing the rent to market rates when a tenant moves out. Wouldn't this encourage landlords to take units off the market and list their properties on Airbnb? There is lax or no enforcement of bans on short-term rentals, which in the city of West Hollywood, we do not allow short-term rentals. Anyone who would like to address that?
I'm not trying to duck the question, but I think it is probably better addressed by local government because all of the ordinances that deal with Airbnb are at the local level. I know we enacted one in Santa Monica. I haven't heard there that it is not being appropriately enforced. In fact, I know that there was a recent enforcement action by the city attorney's office. This is very, the response to Airbnb is still very new, and so I think it's going to take some time before things settle out in that arena.
Thank you very much. No. Rick Watts. Go ahead. Rick Watts.
Hi, Rick Watts, City of West Hollywood. I want to thank you all for coming here and doing this. And I want to thank Senator Allen and Assemblyman Bloom for what you're doing on this. As a 33-year resident of Southern California, in 2000, I was Costa-Hawkins, basically, out of a building up on San Vicente. I was a subtenant, and so I had no protections because Costa-Hawkins specifically carved out any protections for subtenants. And I'm in a similar situation right now where I have been for 11 years. And I hope that the measure that's being contemplated right now will address that. With respect to the first gentleman that spoke, I don't begrudge a landlord who is a long-term owner making a fair return on their investment. But when speculators come in, I'm sorry, they know what the income stream is on the property when they buy it, and if they overpay, they overpay, and I have no sympathy. We have no interest. There is no compelling state interest in protecting speculators. I hope that as these reforms proceed, that perhaps you can include a provision that would require a one-for-one replacement of protections of affordable housing for units that have been Ellised out, and then also beyond that, that you would that as the housing stock turns over, that the new stock be eligible to be covered by rent stabilization, not to be confused with rent control, but rent stabilization.
Thank you, Rick.
If Costa-Hawkins is repealed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So it's 9 o'clock. It has been a very interesting forum. This is just the beginning. Obviously, there are different opinions. I would like to ask you for any final thoughts, calls to action. I think we touched briefly on that. If you will, Assemblymember Bloom.
Well, there is a very, very deep and broad crisis of affordability in the housing market in Southern California and throughout the state. We must address it. It is affecting everyone from a working class, middle income, on down to those who are in the most desperate circumstances, and yes, it is even leading to homelessness amongst many people. We have to do something to address this issue. An increasing portion of most people's net spendable income is going to pay for housing costs. And we have done a good thing by increasing the minimum wage. Almost every penny of that increase is going to increased housing costs. And what does that lead to for everyone from those minimum wage workers to millennials who are entering the housing market? It's leading to a lowering of their standard of living because you have less net spendable income to spend on other things. We're going to be seeing increases, sadly, it looks like we're going to be seeing increasing expenses on the healthcare front. All of these things are conspiring to affect our standard of living. It's something that housing is a fundamental right. We should look at it that way. Even if legally it's not considered that way, we should think about it that way, and we should do something about this issue.
Thank you very much, Assemblymember Bloom, for being here and for all your efforts for making this first move, which is very important. Senator Allen, your conclusions.
Yeah, no, I appreciate everyone's interest in this. I appreciate the work you're going to do to try to help pass this bill. I appreciate Assemblymember Bloom's leadership. He's absolutely right. We've got the worst housing affordability to salary ratio in the nation here in the Southland. If you look at housing costs versus what people are actually making, it's true that the housing costs are a little higher in New York, but people are making quite a bit more. And it's becoming a serious problem. It's impacting us on so many different levels. It impacts our transportation system in ways that people don't always think about. But because people can't afford to live near where they work, they have to live further and further and further out, which of course congests our roads all the more. And because we don't have the kind of decent public transportation system in our region that we need to have, that we're all fighting to create, the situation is exacerbated. So I really appreciate your advocacy, and I appreciate being able to represent an area like this where there's such a firm commitment to affordability and to people's rights and to adequate housing. We now have to get working on the legislature. Thank you.
And I know that this is a forum about, and thank you, by the way, Senator, for all your work and leadership as well. This is a forum about housing, but I'm not going to ask you now, but I just want to remind all of you, there is actually, there are two bills, one in the Senate, the other one in the Assembly. It's very easy to remember because they are both SB and AB1, which is a transportation bill. California has a tremendous problem with infrastructure and no funding to improve infrastructure. You know how hard we have tried here in West Hollywood to have an alignment that serves West Hollywood residents. It's very important that that bill also gets support, and we'll have more information on our website. Allison, Larry, Peter, any concluding thoughts?
So I would just chime in. We do not have an affordable housing crisis. We have an affordable housing catastrophe. As was stated, 64% of the people in this area are paying unaffordable rents. We have 1 in 4 households living below the poverty level. We, as Susie pointed out, we're the homeless capital of the world, practice probably, and that 7 out of the 10 zip codes with the most crowded, overcrowded conditions are here in the LA area. And so we need action, and we need action now. And I know West Hollywood has a history of activism. That won't end here. The one thing you are all lucky about is that you have these two guys as your representative. What we need to do, yes, come on, you don't know how lucky you are. This is the leadership we need. We need to clone these guys and spread them all over the state legislature. So I want to
think one of me is enough.
Not literally, please.
I'm sure there's a lot of people who agree.
In any event, we thank you for your leadership. It's deeply needed.
Thank you, Larry, for being here and for all the work you do. Any thoughts, Allison, to wrap up?
No, I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming, and I appreciate everyone's thoughts on both sides of this issue, and I also appreciate how respectful everyone was toward each other. I mean, this is truly what democracy looks like, so thank you very much, and thank you to you both for being here.
Peter?
And I as well just want to express my thanks to everyone that came out tonight.
Helene, any last thoughts?
Assemblyman and Senator have said that we should support them and be by their sides and help them in whatever way we can.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Again, my name is Hernan Molina. Thank you very much for attending this wonderful forum. Until next time.